we're going to look at the other senses. So we spent a lot of time dealing with visual sensation, but we're going to spend a little bit of time then looking at the other senses that we experience and how perception goes along with those. Because perception is just so much more than what we see. It's what we smell, what we taste, what we hear, what we feel, both physically and also emotionally. So we'll look at some of the other senses now. And the first one we'll deal with is hearing. Okay, so hearing is a real complex, almost mechanical process that begins when sound waves hit the ear, right? It hits the auditory, it hits the outer ear and goes into your ear canal. And that sound is through sound waves. And the outer ear basically serves to collect and magnify the sound waves. That's why it's in such a funky shape. It's evolved to collect these sound waves as they bounce off all over and to magnify them as they go into the ear canal. Then these sound waves create vibrations in the middle ear. And the middle ear vibration is in an area called the tympanic membrane. And the tympanic membrane then vibrates and is connected to the ossicles, or ossicles, which are three of the bones of your inner ear, or your middle ear. And those three bones we generally call them the hammer, anvil, and stirrups. Their kind of official title is the malleus, incus, and the stapes. But those three small bones in your ear vibrate as a result of these sound waves. And the last one, the stirrups, vibrates against what's known as the oval window. And that is where the beginning of the inner ear is. And that oval window continues to vibrate and it gets into the cochlea. And this is where kind of the beginning of sound perception happens. So you've sensed it. Sensation and perception kind of begin in the cochlea. And again, it's all created by sound waves creating vibration within your ear. And then those different parts of the ear are vibrating up against different parts, and that creates more vibration, and it spreads throughout. So the receptor cells in the cochlea, where hearing begins, are housed in a region that is known as the basilar membrane. And it's kind of looks like almost like a snail shell if you were to look at the basilar membrane in there. And the cochlea have receptor cells on them. The cochlea are kind of like they have little, like, they call them hair cells because they kind of look like little hairs that stick up. And that's where these receptor sites are. And the receptor cells receive the sound energy and then transfer it into the auditory nerve, which is right on the other side of the inner ear, and then shoot that information up into the brain in the temporal lobe, where processing can begin. So think of it, if you want to compare it to something we studied a little bit more, the eye, where it goes, light comes in, hits the retina, and is sent to then to the optic nerve. Same thing if you want to really simplify hearing. Sound comes in, hits the cochlea, transfers to the auditory nerve, and then shoots into the temporal lobe, where sound processing begins. So that's kind of the real logistics of how this moves along. Just recognize the basics of it. It's also important to note that the inner ear is responsible for balance, and it has things known as the vestibular sacs, and those are sensitive to tilting. When you move around, go on a tilt-a-whirl or go on a roller coaster ride, those are moved all around, and that's how we get dizziness, is because the inner ear is kind of all shook up. And hearing occurs, there's a couple theories about how hearing occurs, and George von Bexey is kind of the main figure in this, and he says that traveling waves of sound energize the basilar membrane. And so this energy is happening, and as frequencies increase, the peaks of the waves increase, and this means there's increased stimulation of receptors for hearing. So you're hearing peaks as frequency increases, right? The idea that the excitement happens more frequently, and that tunes up your receptors to hear things. And Bexey is also responsible for what's known as the place theory, and there's this idea that sound waves generate activities. Sound waves go at different lengths depending on the frequencies, right? Again, the sense of frequencies increasing, peaks increase. But if they have lower frequencies, they hit at different places on the basilar membrane than those of higher frequencies. And this could explain why some people have a difficult time hearing certain pitches, because those hair cells, those receptor sites, may be less functional in certain people. And then there's something called the frequency theory, and that sense is the idea that senses pitch because the rate at which neural impulses fire is equal to the frequency of particular sounds. So if you think of a sound wave as moving like kind of up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down, those neural impulses fire on the ups. And so it's different neural impulses fire at different rates. And when a sound has the same rhythm as the rate of neural impulses, this is what is known as frequency theory. So there's still some mystery about how hearing occurs, but we've got some of that going on. And then the last thing to deal with the auditory process is deafness. And deafness can kind of occur in two different ways. And there's two different types of deafness. The first is from damage to the ear structure, and that's called conductive deafness, and that's injury to outer or the middle ear structure. And that can happen with you have like an eardrum that bursts or something like that. And then the other one is if there's damage to the neural pathway, and that's sensory neural or nerve deafness, and that's if there's damage anywhere between the cochlea and the auditory cortex. So that could be along the auditory nerve, that could be along some of the basilar membranes, but anywhere from the cochlea to the auditory cortex is what we call nerve deafness or sensory neural deafness. So that was hearing. Now we'll talk briefly about the sense of smell or olfaction, and this is a chemical sense. So it's your body responding to a chemical molecule or reaction. So basically what happens is scent molecules go up your nose, the basics of this, and reach what's known as the olfactory epithelium in the nasal cavity. And at the olfactory epithelium, there are receptor cells there that the scent molecules contact. So those receptor cells are looking for different smells or scents, and these molecules butt up against them and trigger some neurotransmission that fires. And those receptor cells have super long axons that go directly to the olfactory bulbs in the brain. So there's an immediate sense of, I smelled it, it hit the brain. There's very short processing time. It doesn't have to fire through any huge number of neurons. It just goes immediately up there. And then from there, so that's the sensation of smell. And then from there, the information goes to the olfactory cortex, and that's where the smell is processed. And that's where we get the perception of smell. So the sensation of smell is from scent molecules getting the receptor cells at the olfactory epithelium, and then the perception of smell is when it goes to the olfactory cortex and into the limbic system. And what they found that's really interesting is two areas of the brain that are partially responsible for memory, the amygdala and the hippocampus, actually connect to the olfactory nerves. And so this is why the sense that we are used to can trigger memories. So if there's a scent you're familiar with from your childhood, maybe your mom or your grandmother had like a favorite candle. For me, it was lavender. My grandmother's house was always lavender. So if I smell lavender, it triggers memories of that. And so that is how those kind of memories exist, which is an interesting thing. The next we'll look at is the sense of taste or gustation. It's also a chemical sense. And so the way we'll look at it again from sensation to perception is that your tongue is coated with papillae. And those are like small little protrusions. It's like the bumps that you have on your tongue that you can see. And on those papillae are taste buds. And taste buds are your receptor cells, essentially, for gustatory information. That is information associated with taste. And you have 5 basic tastes: sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and umami, or savory. And that's what your body picks up on, and any combination of those can create different flavor palettes, but those are the 5 basic tastes. And there's an idea that these tastes actually have evolutionary functions. So things that are sweet, things that we crave, we tend to crave sweet more often, and sweet tends to be higher in calories. So there's a thought that maybe we evolutionarily want sweet because it has higher calories. We get more value for what we're eating. There's a thought around that. And then things that are poisonous tend to be bitter. I don't really want to know who figured that out, but things that are poisonous tend to be bitter, and so we tend to stay away from that because we don't generally like the taste of bitterness. So there's this thought that perhaps there's some evolutionary thing happening here. In terms of how this information travels from sensation to become perception, it goes from your taste buds through the medulla oblongata, through the pons, through the thalamus. From there, it goes to specific areas of the cerebral cortex, that is the processing center of the brain, that deal with gustatory information, as well as hitting along the way the hypothalamus and the limbic system, where this goes from sensation of taste to perception of taste, and how we recognize that. So that's kind of the gustation or sense of taste. And the last one we'll look at is sense of touch. And so your skin is covered with cutaneous and tactile receptors that process various information about pressure, pain, and temperature. And they're kind of unique. There's 2 kind of unique things. There are receptor cells that are sensitive to pressure and movement, and that information, when those receptor cells are activated, that information is sent to the spinal cord and then shot up the spinal cord, eventually reaching the somatosensory cortex. Pain is felt kind of through 2 different types of neurons. There is the A fibers, which have a thick myelin sheath around them, and those send fast information very quickly through the body about acute pain. That is sharp pain that you feel. That information is transferred very rapidly through the body to the brain to alert that there's a pain happening right here. And the other are C fibers, and those don't have the myelin sheaths around them, and they send information more slowly, and those are the ones that are responsible for aching, throbbing, or just pain that won't go away. And so those two different types of pain are felt through 2 different types of, and the information is processed through 2 different types of fibers. When pain is felt to the brain, or when that information goes to the brain that says, hey, there's pain, the brain shoots information down to the opiate receptors, and those opiates release chemicals that help to reduce the sensation of pain. The goal of the body is to remove itself from pain, and so that's its temporary stopgap measure to reduce the sensation of pain. So pain is experienced through multiple different ways, and again, pressure and pain come from different receptor sites. And the last is that there are receptor cells that are responsible for telling your body about temperature. And those receptor cells can be divided into 2 groups, cold fibers and warm fibers, and those should be relatively self-explanatory, right? Cold fibers fire in response to cold stimuli, and warm fibers fire in response to warm stimuli. So those tell your body whether or not it's hot or cold, and there are different receptor cells that are responsible for each of those. So that's kind of a look at the other 4 senses, right? Hearing, smelling, taste, and touch. And we'll kind of understanding, hopefully, how information turns from sensation into perception in each of those senses.